Yesterday, I reviewed Disney's 1959 animated classic Sleeping Beauty, and if you missed it, I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. But today I'm continuing my little walk through Disney's animated classics by talking about Bambi from 1942. Now, I'm going to try to avoid repeating everything I said yesterday. So, just to summarize briefly, I grew up on Disney cartoons, partly because I had parents who were restrictive in terms of what I was allowed to watch, and I wasn't allowed to watch normal TV or movies as a kid, so I was only allowed to watch these Disney animated cartoons. And But I can't blame it all on my parents. I fell in love with Disney as a child and spent many years being Disney obsessed, and still have a lot of nostalgia for that, for those Disney cartoons, and this will probably come through in this review. And I'm rewatching them now because I've got kids and I'm trying to get them to watch them. So that's the short version. I think I spent a lot longer saying that in yesterday's review. But just to jump into this here, I'm not going to repeat my whole history with Disney, but I will talk about my history with Bambi in particular because, well, I don't know. Because this is a personal YouTube channel, and I like to ramble on about my own memories. But also, I think a movie like this, you almost have to talk about your first impressions about it, because viewing it as an adult and viewing it as a child are quite different. So if you'll bear with me here, I'm going to start at the beginning. Bambi was the first movie I ever saw. I was 4 years old. It was a re release in 1982, re released into theaters. And I remember my mom saying to me, we're going to go to the movies. And she explained to me what a movie was because I had never seen a movie before. And she says it's the same story as your little golden book about Bambi. So I had a collection, I guess my parents must have bought it for me, a collection of Disney books. Actually, I'm not even sure they were golden books, but they were Disney books that had accompanying records with them. Those of you who are old enough to remember records. So you'd play the record, and the record would give some of the songs and the dialogue from the Disney cartoon, and you'd turn along in your books. And I guess it gets a little bit difficult to remember accurately at 4 years old, but I guess I didn't really have a concept that these were based on movies. I thought these were just books and records that existed on their own terms. But my parents explained to me, my mom explained to me, that if we were going to see the movie that was the same story as that Bambi record and book I had. I remember my aunt came along as well. My aunt must have been around 14 or 15 at the time. She was only about 10 years older, 10 or 11 years older than I was. And if memory serves, my mother also warned me about the scene where Bambi's mother dies, just trying to forewarn me about that. Now, I already knew the story because I had the book and record, but my mother warned me it could be a little bit traumatic. And I was completely taken in by the experience of watching Bambi on the big screen. And again, it was the first movie I ever saw, and it lingered in my mind ever since. Now, back in those days, in the ancient times of the 1980s, Disney was restricting the release of its animated films, trying to, I don't know, increase the value of the intellectual property through scarcity. So once every 10 years, these films would get like a theatrical release, about every 10 years. But in between those times, you were just left with your memories of what you saw 10 years ago. And as a kid, 10 years can be like a really long time. Of course, it's a completely different viewing culture now, where you can see anything you want anytime through the internet. So I just had these memories of this Bambi movie, and I remembered it being really epic, and those traumatic scenes or dramatic scenes really stuck in my mind. I also had, as the years went by, kind of that thing where you're looking back on childhood memories of media that you saw long ago, and you thought, was that real? Was that really in the movie, or did I imagine it? One of the scenes that kind of stuck in my memory as one of those was that real scenes was the scenes with the peasants. And perhaps you remember this from the movie. This is at the end of the movie when man is coming into the forest. But it's not only Bambi or the deer that get terrorized by man. All the animals in the forest get terrorized by man, and there's these dramatic scenes of all these animals, the rabbits and the chipmunks, and everyone is running away from the gunfire. And there are these peasant birds in the tall grass, and one of them is freaking out, and she's saying, "He's coming closer. Should I should fly?" And the others say, "No, don't fly. Whatever you do, don't fly." And they try and calm her down, but eventually she says, "I can't stand it any longer," and she flies up, and then you hear a shotgun blasting, and then the dead body of the bird falls to the ground. And it's one of those. Maybe we'll talk about that more later in this review. One of the more horrific parts of the Bambi movie, in part because it's so gratuitous. So these birds, we never see them before. They have no character arc or story arc or anything. They just purely exist to show the terror of these animals as man is coming into the forest, and then to show like the callousness of life in the forest, where just these random animals are getting shot and killed, which is a bit much for a children's movie like that. Well, I'll try and come back to that theme when I talk about maybe the tonal inconsistencies in Bambi. So that was one of the scenes that stuck with me over the years, where I was like, is that real? Although it's interesting, this is probably only of interest to me, but I had misremembered that scene over the years. I had remembered it as the peasants were in a little hollow in the tree, their home, and they were encouraging the third peasant to fly home. And she was trying to fly home, but then she got caught in a bag by the hunter, who just snatched her in a bag out of the air. And then when I rewatched it years later, I was like, okay, so there was that scene in the movie, but I had misremembered it. I don't know. It's just interesting how you, especially as a young kid, how you can kind of, your memory mangles these scenes from movies and you kind of misremember them. Although I don't know, maybe that's something that the younger generation is not going to grow up experiencing, because again, we're now living in an era where you just rewatch these movies anytime you want. So you don't have to wait 10 years for it to get re-released to the cinema. You just go online and rewatch it, and you don't have these vague memories of movies you saw 10 years ago. I'm rambling again. I always do that. Sorry. When I was in second grade, we got a subscription to the Disney Channel, which was new at that time. And they were showing a lot of older Disney movies, which was their model at the time. I guess they were doing essentially what Disney Plus does now, which is a vault for all the old Disney stuff. But they weren't showing Bambi. They weren't showing a lot of the Disney animated classics. And I didn't understand as a kid, of course, the Disney marketing strategy of keeping these things scarce for their next theatrical release. So I wanted to write the Disney Channel and asked them to show Bambi. And my mother actually helped me to write a letter, which wrote a letter about how much I love Bambi and how I wanted them to show Bambi on the Disney Channel. I think it ended up being a couple pages long, largely just because I had large handwriting as a kid. And my mother helped me address it and mail it and send it off. And we got a reply from them saying, "Thank you very much for your letter. It's great to hear how much you love Bambi. We currently have no plans to show Bambi on the network at this time, but we hope you'll enjoy all these other movies that we're going to be showing." And then the list of the upcoming programs. I had to wait. Actually, in between, I think Bambi was actually shown at the local library, or maybe it was at the local university. So this was, I'm not sure what the licensing agreement was, if any, but there was a movie night. I think it was maybe at the local university, Calvin College. My grandmother took me. We got popcorn. There was an auditorium, and it wasn't a theatrical release. They just had the reels. So, I guess back in those days, there was an exception to waiting for the next theatrical release. Sometimes local universities or local libraries would get a hold of those, back in those days, movies were shown on the reel-to-reel projector, and they would show them. I also remember around fourth grade, a discussion occurring in class, like over lunchtime. Everyone was eating lunch or something, and some of the boys started talking about Bambi, which, now, by fourth grade, Disney movies didn't come up much among the boys. They were more into other stuff. I was kind of like the lone Disney-phile in the group, at least that's how I remember it. But they were talking about Bambi, and they said, "Yeah, wasn't that awesome? The way there's that big fight at the end, and then the forest is on fire, and he gets shot, and his dad comes back at the end." And I think they were doing the same thing I did, which was kind of only vaguely remembering the movie and only remembering the really dramatic points. But that the end of that movie is really dramatic, and it does stick in a child's memory. And and then it got re-released into theaters, and then I think like in the early 90s or late 80s again, or something like that. And then it was released on home video after that, so we had it on home video. And once we had it on home video, then I watched it numerous times after that. But still, in my memory, I guess it's interesting how much early childhood shapes you. Even though I've had the opportunity to see Bambi numerous times after that, I still have it in my memory as like this very rare movie that you only see very rarely. It still has kind of like this mystical memory in my childhood. Although when I rewatch it, some of the dialogue between Bambi and Thumper just sounds so familiar to me. Like I've heard it over and over again, and it's like imprinted on some part of my brain. And I think that's because of the record that I used to listen to had some dialogue from the movie on it. I read the book in sixth grade, or around about sixth grade. I don't remember. My grandmother had a copy in her library, I think. I've actually got a copy of the book here, which I picked up at a local bookstore here in Vietnam with the intent of rereading it. It's a slim little volume, as you can see. Shouldn't take me long, but I've not gotten around to rereading it as of yet. So I only have my memories from when I was in sixth grade of reading the book. With the memories from sixth grade are the book was much darker and had a much higher body count and more tragedy than the Disney movie. But we'll have to wait for the reread of this book, which maybe I'll get around to it sometime this year or something, and make a video of that when the time comes. I mean, what other childhood memories do I have of this book? I remember one point my grandfather was babysitting my younger brother and sister, and they watched the Bambi movie, which at that point we had on video cassette. And I remember my grandfather saying, wow, I watched that Bambi movie. I don't understand how anyone could possibly be a hunter after watching that movie. And I should say maybe something I forgot to mention. Yeah, that Bambi movie had a profound effect on my childhood psyche and made me anti-hunting for several years after that, until the deer. The deer was my favorite animal. And when people would ask you, what's your favorite animal, I would say deer. I was so influenced by Bambi. It made a big impact on 4-year-old me. But around fourth grade, I changed my favorite animal to that of a wolf. I thought wolves were just the coolest animal. And that was because of another Disney movie, The Journey of Natty Gann, which that's a different topic for a different day, but really became obsessed with wolves for the next few years. And of course, wolves eat deer. So after that, I decided if I was going to idolize wolves, or if wolves were going to be the animal I most identified with, then I couldn't really criticize hunters, because wolves eat deer as well. But yeah, they're up until that time, I had a view of hunters as evil just because of the influence of Bambi. I had a 9th grade literature teacher who was a big hunter. And he at one point criticized Bambi, and he said, the guy who wrote that book doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know anything about deer. Although according to Wikipedia, I don't know if this is accurate or not, I was looking this up just before the review. They said that Felix Sultan was actually a hunter in spite of writing Bambi. So yeah, make of that what you will. Anyways, now that I've rambled on for 17 minutes, let's jump into this review. I mentioned I looked this up on Wikipedia. I'm using some information I got from Wikipedia, and also from Joe the Disney Guy, who does videos on Disney's classics. I'll try and remember to leave a link to his stuff in the description down below. But yeah, so this is one of those movies. I loved it so much as a kid, but as an adult, it definitely has its faults, although it definitely has its good points as well. I guess let's start off with the good points. I mentioned I haven't gotten around to rereading the book, but there is an interesting quote on the back cover from Tor.com. This is one of those reviewer quotes. This is talking about the book, but, it says, powerful and unapologetic, a celebration of the forest that Sultan loves so dearly. The forest may be dangerous, but even in its wintry worst, even with hunters and foxes and magpies and crows, it is not dreadful, but beautiful. So I think that sums up the movie as well as the book. Well, who knows whether that's an accurate description of the book or not. Like I said, I haven't gotten around to rereading it. But that's definitely an accurate description of the movie. The movie is really a celebration of the forest, and that's where it comes through at its strongest. And rewatching this movie, you can see that it's not just the story of Bambi. It's a story of the whole forest, and this is true from the opening shots where we have these beautiful paintings of the forest beauty, thick with trees and thick with animals, and the squirrels and the chipmunks and the birds and the owls and the mice and all the it's just a wonderland of animals and trees all existing here together. And it's also a forest that, as depicted on the movie, is endless. I mean, Bambi and his mother journey throughout the forest, but they never get to the outskirts of the forest. Like they never, man does enter the forest, but Bambi and his mother or any of the animals, they never encounter civilization. Like they never come to the end of the forest and here's the expressway, or here's the farmhouse out there or something like that. It's, I don't know. The U.S. is a big place, so maybe forests like that still exist in the U.S. But I wonder. And the movie was made in 1942. I assume the forested land has only diminished since that time. Do we still have big woodlands like that left, or are there only scattered patches of woods left in the U.S.? Oh, I should mention that the book is by an Austrian-Hungarian Jew. I guess the fact that he's Jew may or may not be important. Well, since I brought it up, I might as well mention it now. This book was banned in Nazi Germany, according to Wikipedia, because the allegations were made that the deer are supposed to be symbolic for the persecution of Jews. So the way that the hunters are going around shooting the deer is the Nazis thought this was supposed to be symbolic of the persecution of Jews, and so they banned this book. And yeah, maybe it was symbolic of the persecution of Jews. But the book was written by a European, I guess. And Disney adapted it to a North American forest, which involved changing the kind of deer that were represented in this, as well as, I guess, maybe some of the other animals. I don't know. But yeah, it's a North American forest. But there are so many little details, like the mouse kind of waking up and coming out of his mouse nest and getting a drop of water and washing his face, or the birds flying up to their nests, or the squirrels and the chipmunks sleeping on the tree. It's such, and this was during the golden period of Disney animation, where they were spending so much time trying to get the details of everything exactly right. If you go into the making of this movie, they spent a lot of time analyzing the movements of deer and the autonomy of deer to try and get everything exactly right. And there had been forest creatures and deer in previous movies, and short Disney cartoons, but previous movies as well, like Snow White. Snow White had deer friends which were following her around. But and Snow White had only come out just a few years before, but the sophistication of the deer in Bambi, where they were really going for as much realism as possible by studying exactly how the deer moved and trying to mimic that with this Bambi movie. Now, I think Joe the Disney guy said in his video that Disney wanted kind of a combination of authentic animal movements mixed with human child or human baby reactions. So Bambi, when he's first born, is kind of moving around like a deer, but he also has these facial expressions of a human infant. And this was something that struck me watching it. We've got a 1-year-old child at the moment. His kind of eye movements, his kind of sudden smiles in response to the things around the environment. I thought that the infant Bambi deer did a good job of capturing that. And then something else that Disney was also very good at was having real child actors do all the voices for the children, well, children animals in this case, but the animals who are, yeah, the children animals. And this is something that would that I remember striking me as a child when I would go to watch these Disney films in the cinema, thinking like, wow, they sound just like real children do. Now, I mean, in theory, it's not really that remarkable. You just get real children actors and have them do the voices. But, you know, again, you compare this to the cartoons that were on TV in the 1980s, where the voice actors would have limited range, or the children depicted on TV cartoons in the 1980s were done by adult voice actors, because I don't know why. Presumably because they didn't want to mess around with having real child actors. But Disney would get the real child actors, and so that difference between the cartoons you would see on TV every day and the real authentic children's voices coming through with Bambi and Thumper and the other baby rabbits bouncing around. They really went through the effort to get them to sound just like kids. So that's another strong point. Let me maybe finish with the strong points here. The enigmatic relationship between Bambi and his father is, I don't know, arguably both a strong point and a weak point. It's a weak point because it doesn't entirely make sense, and it leaves a lot of questions hanging about what's Bambi's father doing, and why is he not more involved with Bambi. And yet it works in the sense of creating this big mystery around his father. So, the first time Bambi is meeting his father in the meadow, and he says, he looked at me, mother. Bambi is just so fascinated by his father, and Bambi's mother explains to him who his father is, as this great prince of the forest, and he's just this distant presence in most of the film. And then at the ending, I mean, even after Bambi's mother dies, his father really only appears briefly. So then at the ending, when Bambi's father comes and rescues him, or rescue isn't really the right word, just kind of gives him that encouraging voice, that like pushing father voice, like, get up, Bambi, you must get up. He's sorry, I'm thinking, I'm struggling to put this into words, but this regal, authoritative voice that's kind of guiding Bambi along on his journey, I think that works. I mean, and on the one hand, it's a bit strange, and you wonder why his father wasn't around more when his father obviously cares about Bambi. There's kind of a sequel / midquel to this movie, Bambi 2, which I've not seen. I've only read the description of it on Wikipedia, which I guess is exploring all about the relationship between Bambi and his father after Bambi's mother dies. Apparently it wasn't very good, or it was one of those unnecessary Disney animated sequels that came out during a period when they were doing a lot of unnecessary sequels. Like I said, I've not seen it, but you can see where somebody would think that this was a narrative gap that definitely needs to be filled in, because it's a little bit strange that way. But But the mystery of Bambi's father adds kind of a weight to the movie. The movie also, well, okay, maybe let's get into the weaknesses then. The big weakness in this movie is tonal inconsistency, and I know that's kind of low-hanging fruit to point out, but yeah, it's got to be pointed out. So the first half of this movie, roughly the first 40 minutes, there's not really a plot. It's just Bambi and the rabbits going around acting cute. And again, the first time I saw this movie, I was 4 years old. And for a 4-year-old, at least back in those days, or at least for me, that was all I wanted out of a movie. Like I said in previous videos, these Disney animated classics don't seem to be captivating my kids the same way they captivated me at that same age. But, I had never seen a cartoon movie before. Just seeing these cute little animals explore the forest worked for me as a 4-year-old. As an adult watching it, you're like, okay, this is a little bit too much cuteness. So it's a baby deer and a bunch of rabbits, not only Thumper, but all of Thumper's sisters who are bouncing around. And they're trying to get Bambi to talk, and he's experimenting with words, just like a young kid would do, kind of being real proud of himself for saying a word and then repeating that word over and over again. And the Thumper's sisters are laughing just like real kids would laugh. And, again, to Disney's credit, they got real kid laughter voices in on it as they're all bouncing around. But it's just a little bit too much cuteness, and it goes on for far too long. It's essentially the first half of the movie, half hour, 40 minutes. The soundtrack is good. Now the soundtrack is dated nowadays. Like you would never have a soundtrack like this in a modern Disney movie, but it works for the time period, like a lot of choral songs that give the movie a sense of epicness. Now, part of the thing watching this movie, certainly rewatching this movie, is that you know that there's going to be some epic scenes coming later in the movie. And so I think that knowledge of those epic scenes lends weight back into those early scenes where you're watching Bambi being born. Well, sorry, not being born, but just after he's being born, you're watching him explore the forest, and you're thinking, okay, this is all cute, but I know tragedy is coming. So that sense of that that this epic storyline is coming lends maybe more dramatic weight in retrospect to those scenes. And in fact, there's a scene the first time they go to the meadow, and then the humans come, and there's a big panic to get all the animals out of the meadow, and Bambi gets separated from his mother, and he starts yelling, "Mother, mother," and she's yelling, "Bambi, Bambi," and because at some point Bambi's mother is going to die, you think, oh, that this is the scene where she's going to get shot, but it's actually not. They get out of the meadow okay, and it's much later, like 10 or 15 minutes later, that Bambi's mother actually dies. But yeah, that heavy blow when Bambi's mother actually dies really jars with the cuteness of this movie. Um, now, yeah, all right. The movie has certain beats it wants to do in the storyline. It's a coming of age movie. So, going from childhood to young adulthood to falling in love for the first time to starting your own family for the first time. Uh, it's a like a classic coming of age movie in terms of the beats going from birth, the birth of Bambi, to when Bambi has grown up and he's seeing his own children being born. And it's beautiful and emotionally poignant in that sense, but it doesn't have any other story arc. Like, Bambi doesn't start off with a central conflict that he needs to overcome. He's just growing up and life is happening to him along the way. So, like that final climactic scene where man has entered the forest, this was not like a conflict that was set up in the beginning of the movie in terms of like classic storytelling where, like the classic act structure, right? Where there's the hero wants something, there's an exciting incident, the hero goes on a journey, there's a climax, the hero learns something along the way. It doesn't fit into that classic story structure. It's just Bambi is a deer, he's growing up, and then man enters the forest. And now man entering the forest happens a couple different times, but each time it seems to come out of nowhere, and there's no real resolution to it. Like Bambi is still alive at the end, but man is not gone. Presumably, man is just going to enter the forest again sometime later. I mean, one of the things that Joe the Disney guy said in his video is that, I guess, in the initial drafts of this movie, you were supposed to see that the humans had died in this forest fire that they had accidentally started, but then Disney cut that out, saying that you don't need to see that. And I think that was right. You don't need to see that. But, well, I don't know. I mean, at least if you had seen that, that would give you some sort of idea that, okay, these particular hunters will not be coming back to this particular forest. Maybe that would kind of work. Yeah. I mean, along with that, one of the interesting things, this was both in Wikipedia and in Joe the Disney guy's video. Apparently, Walt Disney's own daughter, Diane Disney, criticized this movie and said Bambi's mother did not need to die. And Disney said, well, yeah, but it was in the book. The book. Have to hold that up. And Disney's daughter said, well, but you changed so many other things from the book. You could have easily changed that. And yeah, it makes you wonder, did Bambi's mother need to die? And I'm not sure she did in terms of the dramatic weight of the movie. So imagine somebody has never seen this movie before. You edit it so that you cut out the scene where Bambi's mother dies. And would they even notice that scene was missing? Like, I mean, I guess you would notice that Bambi's mother was not in the second half of the movie, but the second half of the movie shifts focus anyways to Bambi as an adult. Like, there's no sense that Bambi learned anything from his mother's death, or Bambi toughened up because of his mother's death. It's just like this pointlessly tragic scene inserted into the middle of the movie that nobody really learns anything from or grows from in any way. Bambi's father emerges to lead Bambi away, but then it's left a little bit ambiguous whether Bambi's father ends up raising him or not after that happens. Because certainly, I mean, the next time we see Bambi and Thumper and Flower, they're all adults. And there's no indication that this tragedy has weighed on Bambi at all. Joe the Disney guy in his video mentioned that the voices of the adult Bambi and Thumper and Flower are a bit jarring. I think I'd agree with that. I mean, they definitely get across the point, like, this is not the same Bambi anymore. This is the young adult Bambi, and he's got, I don't know, how would you describe his voice? The voice of like a young college student out in the town or something like that, or the way a young man was supposed to sound in the 1940s. But yeah, while I'm on the subject, something that is obviously a little bit strange about this is Bambi grows up very quickly. And, I guess animals do mature much faster than humans, right? Like a deer doesn't have like 18 years from birth to adulthood. It goes much quicker. So I guess over the course of 1 year, a deer goes from fawn to young buck. But the thing is, the last time we see Bambi, we're already well into winter. And in fact, the scene where Bambi's mother gets shot was Bambi's mother. They had just discovered the new spring grass. Like the snow was receding. There was new spring grass. Now winter is obviously not completely over, and it does start snowing heavily again by the end of that scene. But you get the impression that winter is more than half over. I don't know. Of course, it's not clear in the movie how much time has gone by. It could have been 2 years. But yeah, the point being that this kind of tragedy jars with the cuteness overload of the first half of the movie in a way that I don't think really works. And it's interesting. This movie is regarded as a classic nowadays, but I don't think it was terribly well received when it came out. According to Wikipedia and Joe the Disney guy, it got mixed reviews when it first came out. I think it actually was another Disney animated classic that actually lost money when it first came out. I forget where I read this, somewhere on the internet, that critics at the time said that Disney was trying to just foster on them some story about a dumb deer, and I remember the first time I saw that, I remember thinking, oh, how dare you? Bambi is a classic. You can't call it a story about a dumb deer. But I fell in love with Bambi when I was 4 years old. If I was an adult in the 1940s, seeing this on the screen for the first time, maybe I would think, what is this stupid story about a dumb deer? Why are you trying to make me feel sad because a deer got shot in the woods, right? There's also a story, I don't remember where I read this, but again, somewhere on the internet. Walt Disney was going to one of the first screenings of Bambi and kind of sitting quietly in the back to kind of incognito see how the audience would judge it. And there's that scene when Bambi's mother got shot, and Bambi comes out, and he's like, "Mother, mother, where are you, mother?" Uh, it's supposed to be a real emotional scene, and some teenager somewhere in the theater goes, "Here I am, Bambi," and the whole theater breaks into laughter, and completely ruining what was supposed to be this devastating scene. And Walt Disney was really upset by that, and in later movies, I think, I forget where I read this, but in later movies, he tried to make sure he never had a scene like that, where it was just kind of hanging over the audience, inviting some teenager to yell out something snarky like that. The tragic beats were not allowed to linger in his subsequent movies because he saw that audience reaction to it. But I think stories like that illustrate to me that, of course, everyone who grew up since the 1940s, and how many generations has that been, right? Like the baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, the millennials, whatever. We all saw Bambi when we were 4 years old, or kids, and we were all traumatized by that scene of Bambi's mother dying. But the original audience, teenagers during the 1940s, or adults during the 1940s, were prone to kind of make fun of it, or say, what is this stupid movie about a dumb deer that Disney is making us watch? And so when you try and view it through that lens and say, okay, this isn't some beloved childhood classic, I'm an adult in the 1940s watching this movie, then you do kind of think, okay, what is this? I mean, that must have been how the audiences reacted to it. I mean, this cuteness overload in the first 40 minutes, with Bambi learning to walk, Bambi learning the names of things, the laughing rabbits, Bambi and Thumper on the ice. Then this out of nowhere, really dark scene where Bambi's mother gets shot. And then we go right back to the cuteness overload with the birds singing about spring. I think the nostalgia critic in his review of Bambi pointed out that, okay, you have this really tragic beat, and maybe that's okay in the movie, but then you can't follow it up with these birds singing this cheery song about spring. And then, man entering the forest at the end. And that scene about the peasants that I talked about way at the beginning of this review, some 40 minutes ago now, that stuck in my mind as a kid. I mean, that really is a very gratuitous scene. Just to kind of, I guess it emphasizes the callousness of forest life when hunters come in, or life and death in the forest, or something like that. But if that's the tone that we're going for, what's all this cuteness overload doing in the first half of the movie? Now, yeah, the dramaticness of the whole last 20 minutes of the movie, maybe, where the man enters the forest, Bambi has to fight out those vicious dogs. He gets, and it's just kind of one thing on top of another, right? He fights off the dogs. He runs, he jumps, he gets shot. And I do have memories of a kid watching this and just being horrified, like, oh no, they shot Bambi. And the movie has already established its tone, at least. I mean, as an adult, of course, you know that Bambi's not going to die. But as a kid, you're not so sure, especially because this is a movie that's already killed off Bambi's mother, and, callously killed off that random peasant bird. You're thinking, is Bambi going to be all right? And then his father comes in. and his father has such an air of authority with him that is, in his father's voice, "Get up, Bambi. You must get up." Now, there's a little bit of cheating here in that Bambi seems to survive that bullet wound through sheer force of will. Where at first it looks like it's, like he can't get up, like he's been mortally wounded by this bullet, but then moments later he's okay and he's running around as if nothing ever happened just because of force of will. I don't know. I bought it as a kid, so as an adult you think, okay, what's going on here? But then they're running through the forest, and the forest is burning, and it is an epic ending that sticks in your mind. If you haven't seen it recently, it does just kind of ratchet up in intensity as they're running down the river and they get to the waterfall and they don't know what to do, and then this burning tree is going to fall down on top of them, so they have to jump, and then they make it, and it's a dramatic ending that does stick in your mind, but it's totally inconsistent with the first half of the movie, I think. Yeah, it. Yeah, part of the problem, I think. Part of the problem, I mentioned one of the early reviewers criticized Disney for just making this movie about these dumb deer. And you do kind of think, are deer suitable protagonists for a movie? I mean, deer would seem to be just victims of hunters. They don't really have... And it's one of the things that struck me as an adult watching this movie a little bit strange was how everyone is referring to Bambi as the prince of the forest. Because when you think about like the prince of the forest or the king of the forest, you think about you think about like the Lion King, right? The lions are like the king of the jungle, the king of the forest. But deer, how are deer the prince of the forest? But I guess maybe another way to think about it is before humans, the deer actually arguably did have a regal part in the forest. I think the ancient people revered like the elk spirit or the antelope spirit, or these deer-like animals. And now that we have guns, deers are just victims of guns. But in the days before guns, there were wolves and foxes that would prey on the deer. But I think the wolves would only attack like the old and sick deer or the young deer. So the deer with the big antlers, like Bambi's father, who has these huge antlers, can easily defend themselves against the wolves. It's only like the old and the sick that the wolves will target. Or maybe a whole pack of them could take down a big deer, but it would be a big fight. Like those big male deer with the big antlers give as good as they get in their encounters with the wolves. Now, of course, they don't stand a chance against a gun, but they can be majestic, powerful animals in their own right. And I think were regarded by ancient people as such. And you do see that one of the best scenes in the movie is when Bambi and his mother are in the meadow, and Bambi has never seen any other deer before this. He had just been remarking to his mother, how come we never see any other deer in the forest? And then they are in the forest, and then this whole group of young bucks just comes dashing through the forest, and they're they're sparring with each other, doing little mock fights, and they're jumping off rocks, and they're just looking so majestic. And the music that comes through in this part is really perfect. It's kind of this pseudo classical music that was used. Yeah, the music throughout, I think, is one of the strong points for this movie. And then finally, Bambi's father comes as like this prince of deer with these huge antlers. So in that sense, I guess deer do have a certain majesty to them, and Bambi can be seen. Well, yeah. What was my original point? I guess my point is that there is a certain majesty with deer, arguably, and this does come through with Bambi's father. But at the same time, having human hunters as the antagonists, I mean, if wolves or foxes were the antagonists, then the deer could easily fight them off. With hunters as the antagonists, the deer are just largely victims. So, I don't know. Does it work having deer as a protagonist in this movie? I guess is my point. And I guess I'm kind of arguing both sides against myself as I talk around in circles. That's how these reviews usually work. To sum up, it's definitely an interesting movie, and it's got epic qualities about some of the scenes. The cuteness overload of it, the baby deer and the little rabbits laughing that make up the first half of the movie don't seem to work with me as well now, but I loved it when I was 4 years old. The ending scenes still have an emotional punch and are still very dramatic even as an adult. I don't think they tonally mesh with the beginning of the movie. I don't think Bambi's transition into an adult deer is particularly well done. It just seems to be sudden. I don't think Bambi's mother dying really works. I don't think it serves the movie in any point. But the enigmatic relationship between Bambi and his distant authorial father, who kind of comes through as this voice of authority to guide him at the end, that part seems to largely work. It's well, at this point, the movie is definitely part of our cultural legacy, and it's interesting. It's an interesting movie, if nothing else. I'm gonna have to leave it there.